The speaker is Neill Bowler from Mate Office. So Mate Office, I think at that time was the first even organization assimilating radio occultation data. Is that right? In 20 and in 26, is that right?
I,
Nevertheless, it's okay. Please, we look forward to
I
it.
don't honestly know if we were the first because we ended up being in a race with ECMWF, and who got there first exactly, I don't know. So don't worry, this talk is very short. I'll just give you a kind of few reminiscences on those early days, mostly from John Eyre. But if we're playing PowerPoint bingo, here you go. We've got to have a photograph of Rick Anthes in the talk. The dinner tonight is up at the Mesa Labs, and they have a Hall of Fame there of the NCAR directors. So if you want to go and pay homage to this particular photograph, then please do that tonight. So I'm really, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little story of the origins of RO in NWP from John Eyre's perspective, because he was there at the very beginning and working out some of the kind of things to do. So his first introduction to RO actually came via Tony Hollingsworth, who sent to him sometime in late 1993 or early 94, this paper by Gorbanov and Sokolivsky, which set out a lot of the kind of fundamental mathematics that you would use if you were to do an atmospheric retrieval for radio occultation. And John, at the time, he'd been doing a lot of work on the assimilation of satellite radiances, because that was the time when people were transitioning from using satellite retrievals of temperature and humidity to direct assimilation of radiances. So he was at the point where he'd been working a lot on that, and then he was pointed to this paper, and he was very much attracted by the simplicity and the beauty of the method that was involved. And in this paper, it sets out some details of how to do a kind of ray tracing forward operator. So he was living at the time in Oxford, and so went down to the Radcliffe Science Library and decided, okay, I'm going to read everything I can that's available there on radio occultation. It took him a morning because there were only a handful of papers at that time. It was still very early in the field. And after that, he then said, well, okay, how would we use this technique in a numerical weather prediction model? And so he came up with a report and looked at how to kind of do it in a quick and practical way, and looked at some of the issues involved. Now, because he'd come from just this work looking at the direct assimilation of satellite radiances, he was very much attracted by the idea of assimilating bending angles rather than refractivity profiles from a retrieval, because a lot of the issues that you have with assimilating a retrieval from a satellite radiance apply then to the retrieval of refractivity. It's still doable, but there are issues there. So it set out a whole load of thoughts on how you would do it in a practical context. But he always thought that this work was very partial and done very quickly. So he left it as an ECMWF tech memo, and didn't publish it in the open literature, which is, he says, one of his biggest regrets. And he uses it as a reminder to all sorts of young scientists that it is very important to get it out in the literature, because even if it's not complete, if it's good, people will refer to it. And a lot of people have referred to this paper over time. So that then kind of marked the end of his time working at ECMWF, and he returned back to the Met Office. And when he was returning, he kind of asked the director of ECMWF, do you have a continued interest in doing RO? And the director said, no, not really. So he then kind of took that work back and said, okay, this is something the Met Office needs to do. So he recruited a young scientist called Sean Healy, and set him to work on how we would do the assimilation of RO. And also during that time, obviously GPS Met was launched. And there was this young man called Rob Kaczynski who was doing all various studies with GPS Met, and John provided him with some of the model data from the Met Office, and so kind of wheedled his way onto one of the final authors of this paper. And John has kind of been a stalwart of satellite data assimilation for decades. And you might take it as some surprise that actually this is his most highly cited paper of all time. So it's amazing how, you know, these things will turn out. So that was kind of the origin story from from John's perspective. Obviously, we know the big story of RO over the recent years has been the increase in the number of observations. So I thought I'd just finish by showing the summary of the kind of data denial experiments that Neill had been doing in collaboration with us at the Met Office. And so what you're shown here is the impact of removing a particular type of observation from the Met Office system on the quality of the forecasts. And so each of these, actually, we deny it all of the microwave radiance observations, and that seems to have the biggest impact. But if you measure against observations, then GNSS-RO is the fourth most important observation type. If you measure against ECMWF analyses, then it's the second most important observation type. So we've gone from these early days of experimenting to RO being genuinely one of the most important observation types that we assimilate. And obviously, we're doing experiments with ROMX where we have a much higher data volume. And you see a positive uplift, in our case, after a fair bit of work with biases. But you see a positive uplift from assimilating that extra observations. And so you start to go, well, if we had more observations, you know, 30,000, 40,000 occultations a day, would GNSS-RO become the most important observation type, at least in the Met Office system? So the future is bright, and maybe, you know, RO will be the most important observation type to NWP centers. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neill. Very nice presentation. And Andrea is the next speaker. So all know Andrea and from the very powerful Graz team.